Hey, everybody, welcome back to another Motivation Monday podcast for Monday, May 7th, 2018. Spring is here, at least in New England. Hope you guys had a great weekend and hope you're ready to get back into it this week. So, this week's Motivation Monday is going to center around an email I got from one of our faithful listeners, David. David wrote in about rhythm changes, and he was wondering, why rhythm changes has become this crazy, pervasive set of changes that has hundreds of different tunes written over it. Why did it get to that point? So David writes, I've always wondered why the changes of Gershwin's I Got Rhythm have become such a standard template for jazz players, just as the blues changes have. The chord progressions in the A part and the bridge do not seem particularly remarkable. What is it that has attracted improvisers and contrafact composers to this song since it was published? It's a driving tune with a title that's all about the beat. Could this be a factor? Did I Got Rhythm become a popular hit at a point in jazz history when players were looking for the opportunity to show off their chops and announce that they got rhythm? Anything you could tell me would be great. Well, David, let's get into this. I've done a little bit of research, and it's kind of confirmed what I've thought about this particular tune. So let's dive into talking about a little bit of the history of I Got Rhythm and why it has become such a standard for jazz musicians. So, the first reason, and a little bit of a kind of history lesson, like so many of the other kind of pervasive jazz tunes that we hear in the jazz language that have carried throughout the decades, it's due to just a couple of really, really popular musicians, people that you would consider tastemakers, that decided they loved the chord changes to this tune and wanted to write a contrafact over it. Now, writing a contrafact is also a really interesting part of jazz history because instead of using the original tune, a musician could write their own melody over the chord changes and they wouldn't have to pay any copyright fees. So that's one of the biggest reasons why we see the contrafact come into play at this point in jazz history, right around like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, was really where the contrafact started to come into play. And it was due to a couple of jazz musicians, some of the most famous in history, that took a liking to these chord changes that George Gershwin had written and decided to write their tunes over it. So Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, and Lester Young are largely credited with the rise in popularity of what we now call rhythm changes, right? So Duke Ellington wrote a tune called Cottontail that became a huge hit in the day. Charlie Parker wrote Anthropology, and Lester Young wrote Lester Leaps In, all over these rhythm changes. So that's really the history. I really don't think it has much to do with anything but those three guys really popularizing the changes, playing really, really great solos over the changes, and writing awesome tunes over that particular set of changes. It made people take notice. And just like happens in any field at any point in history, as soon as some of the most popular people of the day start doing something, everybody kind of takes notice and starts following suit. That's just human nature, right? We look towards our heroes and we start imitating them in a very real way. So people heard Anthropology, people heard Cottontail. Wow, these changes are really great. Maybe they investigated the chord changes a little bit further, and then maybe they started writing their own tunes over this particular 32 bar form as well. And then, boom, all of a sudden you have a trend in the music, and that trend just kind of keeps developing until it's become one of sort of the standard things in the history of this music. So that's a little bit of the history on where it came from, who were some of the first jazz musicians to actually write tunes over this chord progression and bring it to the forefront of jazz. Now let's actually talk about the actual chord changes and why, in my mind, people like Duke Ellington and Charlie Parker and Lester Young were so interested in what these changes had to offer. So we've talked about rhythm changes on the show a little bit in the past, but let's kind of go over it again. I mean, this form really does offer a lot of things that an early bebop musician would be very, very interested in. And that's the only part of the email that I have to kind of disagree with David on, is that these changes are actually pretty remarkable if you really think about it. So let's think about like the first half of the A section. What it's really based around is a 3-6-2-5-1 progression, or a 1-6-2-5-1 progression, right? And for bebop musicians, that's like the holy grail of forming these really, really interesting bebop lines, is that extended cadence. So it's basically like two cadences built into one. You get a 2-5-2, and then you get a 2-5-1. That's like a bebop musician's dream. They can dream up so many different things that are going to happen over that particular cadence that I can almost see exactly why somebody like Charlie Parker would immediately be pulled towards this progression after listening to the original recording of it, right? So that's one thing. If you look at the second half of the A section, the form goes to the 4 chord, right? All of a sudden we get that key of the 4 being tonicized by, the 1 turning into a dominant 1 and then jumping down to that 4 chord. Again, that's, if you look at jazz history, so many bridges, so many modulations that happen in so many bebop tunes and jazz tunes, they go to the 4 chord. So this 8 bars, the A section of I Got Rhythm, is like a little microcosm of all of the other chord progressions that these guys were trying to write. So when they heard it, they went, wow, it's all packed into 8 bars. It goes by extremely, extremely fast. So not only did it represent a lot of the chord changes they were trying to use, a lot of the stuff they were trying to play over, but it was also an extreme challenge to be able to play all this stuff in such a short period of time, right? So I don't know, that's my guess, but I would venture to say that that's probably more true than not true. And then if you take a look at the bridge, this really awesome thing happens where in the A sections we have all these chords packed into the measures, 2 chords a measure in every single measure of the A section. Then all of a sudden you get to the bridge and we have these really long extended dominant chords. So it jumps up to the 3rd and it starts on the dominant chord there. And then we have these 2-bar phrases that just hang out on 1 chord. So it's like this incredible breath of fresh air after you come from this really, really super dense chord changes happening all the time. Then all of a sudden you get to the bridge and it's like this really, really open section. And it also features all dominant chords, which, as we know, you can use a ton of tension over. You can use a lot of different chord substitutions over dominant chords. So really, after you get done kind of thinking about it that way, this form is actually a 1940s and 50s improviser's dream. It's a chance to show off like every single thing that they've been working on in some form or another. And again, Charlie Parker and a lot of those guys, Lester Young, Dizzy Gillespie, they were all about continuously challenging themselves. And I think if you've ever played over rhythm changes, this is a very, very challenging form, especially when you're playing it at a fast tempo. So anyways, that's my take on it. Thanks, David, for sending in the email. I always love to get questions like that. It forces me to do a little bit of research and really actually think about some of the stuff that I just take for granted when it comes to jazz history and why we do the things that we do. So a big shout out to David for sending in the email. If any of the other listeners out there have questions like that, do not hesitate. I love it because it also gives me great ideas for these Motivation Monday podcasts and our Friday podcasts as well. So thanks a lot for that. All right, everybody, we'll see you on Friday with a regular episode. Have an awesome week. Talk to you soon. Bye.